Hello, hello, and welcome to Presence Practice with Poonam and Parker. And we are going to approach a rather delicate topic in the world, politics. And we are based in the US, but I think that this applies to anywhere. Hey, Poonam. Hey, Poonam, look at us wading in, but not wading in with an opinion. No opinions here. So I could say what Eckhart would say about this, but that's readily available. You can Google that if you want to know. And I'm feeling very much in alignment with it. So I'll maybe use a few more words or maybe different words than what he would use. First, I want us to remember a few things. We cannot possibly understand what something really means. We cannot define something as good or bad. Nothing is good or bad, but thinking makes it so. So for those of you who feel like your position is the right position, that you are the David and the Goliath of the situation, it's just a position that's been created. If action is required of us, if we are sitting so still in presence and okay with everything as it is inside of us, and an impulse comes to us to do something, then we go do it. That's what we go and do. And it's a high quality doing. There's no reactivity inside. We're not fighting anything. And we just move. We move with that truth so that it doesn't matter what other people's fixed opinions are, what their emotional reactivity looks like, the tenuousness or the fearfulness of the potential of situations or choices that are outside of our control. It is this way. And this is the maturing of the spirit, where we sit from a place of wisdom, and we can see unconsciousness, know that it's unconscious. And the impulse to move or to do something comes from clarity of service, of deep compassion and love. And we do it because it's the truest thing it's so true for us that's what we're going to do without any reactivity. If there's reactivity, then we have to ask ourselves what's happening, where has the fear crept in with a sometimes very seductive story. I can say that purity is a dedication to that awareness and a willingness to authentically see when that seductive voice begins to speak to us. So in politics, it's the same. I want to just remind us what we already know is that the media wants to drag the bottom of the consciousness and show it to all of us, oftentimes with the impulse to become fearful, which vibrates with the fear that we each individually watching it are holding. Who knows how many souls can be growing through something that's so visible as politics, what they're learning about themselves. But everything, there's nothing out of order. Everything is required. And what is true and real about all of us will always be true and real, with or without these bodies of form. Some people think that it means that when Eckhart's speaking or when another teacher is speaking about things, that it leaves us placid and unable to be of service or unable to make any action because the action looks like you're contributing to the conflict, so you do nothing at all. And now or making words for people like snowflake and other things. You know, all of this has violence in it. And so you just have to decide, do I want to contribute to more violence? So if you could sit still, sit quietly until there's no reactivity in you. And if some action it comes that is required of you, then you get up. Otherwise, you just do nothing. Pour over your compassion over the situation. We're living in times, and Poonam and I both had lived in the time before the internet as adults, even young adults, and were raised without it. So there was 30 minutes of news in the evening when I was growing up, every evening, national news, and you had no idea about the opinion of the newsmaker. Walter Cronkite, I never knew what he thought about what he was saying until later when he wrote books and such. But we're pouring over, and that's not wrong either. We all get to see each other's business, where our failings are, on the horizontal, where the failings are, where our winnings are, and we get to let go of all of that, stories in ourselves and stories about other people. We get to know other cultures that we didn't really know before. We just associated them with their movies, for instance. We get to grow. But the downside of that is it's a lot of information. And a story making mind could try to make sense of it by making patterns out of things and conspiracies and all of this. And now we've entered the realm of insanity, sometimes clinical insanity, as it's even defined today. And what about the people that we create the other out of, who are for the other politic? There will be no understanding there because we've made them the other. No compassion. And if we want to rise up with our politics in a way that supports a new earth, a more loving and peaceful place, it wants it right now. Everybody's wanting it. The love of pets across even cultures where pets weren't even allowed indoors until very recently, right? That's bringing in the still pure lovingness onto this planet. So whether it seems like a person is actively waking up or not, every time they pet a dog, there's a desire to connect with that purity and wholesomeness. And that's just one example. And there is leadership that's getting it right. And we have the words of Marcus Aurelius, who happened to be a great leader, as Eckhart says, but also a wise soul. For the most part, there were some odd things that he did with his son that I didn't understand, but if these are his words, Marcus Aurelius' words in his heart, and there was wisdom there. And Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, was all about speaking to leadership. And that, what I would love to see, and we'll let the ride tell its own tale, but what I would love to see is people that are waking up, that feel that true calling of service, of true service, of breaking paradigms and funky structures, because it feels very true and right to come forward and let people see that wisdom that we all could benefit from. So lastly, and Poonam, if you have any additional words on this. please share them. The last thing I want to say is if you find yourself already down the bunny hole, something deeply impactful has happened that shocks the world or shocks your community or shocks just you, to return to your breath again and again. That suffering is optional, and the most profound and beautiful thing that each individual has to offer that's on the path of waking up is our clear, storyless consciousness. Yeah. So I'm here for anybody who wants to step forward into this realm. That's of I can, as any of us can really probably spot it. You can spot waking up in a person from across the street. You'd see how even looking at somebody in a store or something, you can see it. So or sense it, and even people who seem deeply unconscious sense it. They want to be near it and support it. It brings out their consciousness, their what they may perceive as their better self. And it's really the light of their consciousness, the dimmer switch, turning it up. Hey, Poonam.
I have like 2 or 3 different going off tangent observations to make. One of the things, the fundamental principle of the universe is law of attraction. So there is something that collectively the human beings, and that's what Eckhart is was stating in module 6 of Conscious Manifestation course. Collectively, the collective consciousness of that nation is causing, so the compassion we can bring is the understanding that the leader is reflecting the collective consciousness of the majority. And so what is the compassion we can bring to their collective consciousness? And the collective consciousness is more of, oh, I cannot have a job. I fearful of I can't even feed my family, right? I'm in the state of Virginia, or I'm in like the Midwest somewhere, and I cannot feed my family, right? I cannot hold my jobs. All the jobs are going overseas. So there are not very many companies investing in the Midwest. Where is an Amazon investing in the Midwest? Where is a Google investing in the Midwest, right? Where is a Google going to West Virginia and standing up a company in West Virginia? That's not happening. So until and unless corporate America takes a stance and says, hey, I am going to save the rest of the country, I don't need to be focusing on California or Colorado or Texas. I need to actually go to all these states and distribute the wealth of corporate America, capitalism, right? The fear is not going to go away. And 9/11 happened. We've had 2008, the fear of losing homes, foreclosures. One point was the bubble of 2000, the dot-com bubble of 2000, where people lost jobs, people lost homes. In 2001, 9/11 happened. So the compassion is, how much have we suffered in the past 20, 30 years economically as a nation? right?
It may be, yeah, we don't know
So
what's going to happen, but it may be that there's no money used at all anymore, that it's not about that maybe the corporations don't go and do anything at all.
so
Maybe this whole paradigm just gets reworked, right?
we don't know, and that's the part we need to understand, that we, one, the
Right.
compassion that what has arisen, and that's what the leadership capitalizes on, is the fear that exists in the collective consciousness. So compassion and understanding that there's fear, right? The predominant
Yeah.
emotional feeling is fear. Now what that fear is going to do is, we are aware already, whenever we have that much of unconsciousness, something, either nature will take over, right? Everything is interconnected. Eckhart
Yes.
has this beautiful story about how, and this is for the viewers to know this magical thing he talks about, that his mom, when she was 19 years old, she was in Germany, was recruited to work in an arms factory. She was impulsive and rebellious, so she talked to the girls at the arms factory and got into a truck and told the guy to drive her out of the arms factory, and ran away. And within 2 or 3 days of her running away, that whole ammunition factory was hit by a bomb or something. So he says the creation of him, look at how many interconnected things happen. And she went, his mom went to her mom, and the mom said, no, they're going to come kill me. So you better run away from here too. So she lived in hiding with her aunt for
Mhm.
years, right?
Mhm.
And if she wouldn't have been impulsive, look how everything is so interconnected.
Right.
And he says his dad did the same thing against the government then, right? So, one, we have to understand that once we have that much presence power, the point of power is in the present moment. Once we know that everything is so interconnected, there is something going on about all these changes as well that is going to elevate the level of compassion and empathy. Look at what happens when we have wars or when we have a natural disaster. Once we have a Hurricane Sandy hit New York, look what happens to the people that we think are so impassive. They start to help their neighbors, right? They start to have compassion for the. There are so many stories about people helping each other out, and so we can never say we are too minuscule, such a speck in this whole cosmos, that we cannot understand what planetary intelligence is doing with all this chaos. How can we, as a human being, say, I know this should not be happening? How can we do that? Is my um, inner being says everything is perfect. If that means millions of us, and there's this fear about that coronavirus. I mean, look at the things that are happening right now, right? There's a coronavirus from China happening, all these world leaders doing what they're doing. There are fires in Australia. Look at all the chaos, but in the middle of the chaos is, look at how much good is happening, how many people are awakening. Let's focus on what good is happening, and let's focus on me getting aligned with myself, right? Every moment, me not introducing more of the fear. The trust is in that connection to source. So trust your connection to source. Get in alignment with your inner being and say, no matter what chaos is happening on the surface, inner being, I'm still, I know, as long as I have that connection to source, everything will be all right. I will be taken care of. And if in that something happens to me, this body passes away, that's okay. I'm a bubble. I'm a speck. It's okay, right?
Yes, yes. I think that it really puts the emphasis on perspective, the perspective, and holding that. Because if you are only holding a relative, a horizontal perspective on it's always been chaos on this planet. At any lifetime, there's some kind of chaos and mayhem, and we get there by each individual becoming clear and peaceful themselves, and the seduction of becoming as chaotic as the chaos is happening, thinking that the result will be order, is faulty. If you look at the most progressive countries that are well funded, they have plenty of funds for each of their citizens, and everyone's gone to education, and they've moved very quickly to eliminate finite sources of energy. And if you look at those countries, though, they had an awful lot of suffering, very even recently, lots and lots of suffering. And each step of the blossoming of consciousness in each one of these areas, take those country names away and the borders away, it's a culture. It's a culture where, the majority has agreed on a kind approach to the prison system, a kind approach to people who are least amongst us, the disabled mentally, the people that are doing harmful things, crimes, things that reactivity wants justice for, right? But the softer approach is creating a more peaceful and harmonious and prosperous society. And it's each, like we get to a place of where we're able to understand that our energy field first, and we can sit in our mind and construct from a place of defense all kinds of interesting stories. But this, like Poonam was saying, is not that important. It's just not that important. It just seems important right now. And there's a difference between this is important, I need to do something because the reactivity in us, or some skewed sense of compassion. It's compassion, but it doesn't feel like it. It feels like pain, right? So we're
Fear.
out into these other people's energy field. But if we're deeply rooted in the present moment with that total clarity, and we see something, we see a dog lost walking down the street, we just go over and pick it up. We don't have a whole conversation in our head about whether or not we have a place for it, or we can afford it, or you go and move and start doing that. Or maybe you don't. There's no moral clause or law clause of all of this. When you're sitting in your center, you're most often going to come from a very wise place that your thinking mind couldn't possibly dream up, because it's just chewing. It's amazing how many thoughts aren't ours, or how many thoughts that are absolutely useless, and how still a mind can become, and then how productive and intelligent. I also want to point out for people that are having, that are in these political growing pains, and it can feel very unstable wherever you are in the world. We're not exempt from it if our country seems to be more developed because it has something more technically advanced than another place. If we're in that space, from Poonam and I, all our heart is with you. It's very seductive to stay in a thinking mind that's contracted, especially if we have generations of this suffering that's unfolding, and you happen to be right there where the rubber meets the road of waking up and living in this kind of dynamic, right? Or if we're in a place like the US where there's a lot of this tension right now, the truest thing we can give is our complete attention, without reactivity, without a story that creates it.
And as Eckhart says, the 20th century was much more horrendous than the 21st, because in the 20th century, not only did we have the Holocaust, we had 2 wars. So the amount
Many
of
wars.
torture and the rape and pillage of women and
Yeah,
what has happened in the 20th century, we can't even compare to what's happening now. We are in a kinder world.
we are. And look at. I want to point something out before we end here. I grew up in the 80s and it was brutal. It was nobody even said the word abuse around us until, I don't know, maybe 85 or 86. And then it was these talk shows that did often scurrilous reporting and crazy times on that. I don't know if it's still happening. I don't have a television, but I will say that um, it was the first time that consciousness seemed to come into parenting. And if you look at the US, we did not have a single generation where mothers weren't losing their children. And so there was a large number of women. I mean, it wasn't just the wars, it was the Depression, the Industrial Revolution. We didn't even recognize children as children until I think Dr. Seuss came along. We didn't even see them. We saw them as, so that's why you see 6-year-olds smoking cigarettes in the coal mines, because the more children you had, the more workers you had in on the farms, which the U.S. predominantly was. So you were losing children to disease, to industrial accidents, to war, and then the Depression. I mean, so much in a 300-year period. So the pioneering souls that came here, the ones who considered themselves prosecuted and were unable to practice their religious practice, or criminals that they just wanted to get rid of because everybody was dying for the first 100 years. Every time we go west, there was a lot of fighting with the people that were already here. What a mess. And so here we are today. But I've gotten to witness in my lifetime that even in the early 90s, so as soon as the light, even if it was a foggy, nasty light through grotesque talk shows in the 80s, we started to say abuse. It was like a vomit. It was the nastiest bile. So we made it salacious because we didn't know how to hold it at first. But we saw parents everywhere around me. I saw parents that started asking the question, what does my child need to be happy and healthy? And we've had maybe 3 generations of that. And they're in the workforce now. And we're going to put them in these 9-to-5 jobs and say that we're set up for the framework of a factory worker, 9-to-5, right, or 8-to-6, or whatever it is. And we set up this whole thing of what we admire, how productive you are. We can drop it all and trust that these younger generations, that especially when we have a majority that were not abused, that were listened to, that someone said, we want to hear you, we want to know what your unique gifts are in school and at home. Many, and there weren't very many of us that weren't being really ignored, neglected, or abused in the 70s and 80s and probably the 60s, maybe the 50s. So I just want to say that forget about what the news is saying, that this is happening. It's happening. And those of you who've been here long enough can share with the younger generations the perception of the contrast in how things were in the 80s and then how things were in the 90s. And look at all the beautiful music that was created out of that throughout the 90s. All right, I think this is long enough. Thank you, Poonam.
Thank you, Parker.